Listen carefully, because what I'm about to share with you may make you rethink every interaction you have ever had with someone who is not in the same stage of life as you. And the truth is, this may already be happening in your own life. Someone may have developed deep feelings for you, but there is an age difference between you that changes the way you understand attraction, emotional connection, and attachment. I am a psychologist, and I want you to stay with me because this conversation is not only about romance, it is about human psychology, emotional power, vulnerability, and the hidden forces that influence the way we connect with others. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because what you discover here may help you understand your emotions better and prevent you from making choices you might later regret. Now imagine someone older or younger than you begins showing interest in a way that feels unusually intense, almost impossible to explain, as if they notice something about you that nobody else has ever recognized. Your mind immediately begins searching for meaning. It starts filling the empty spaces with explanations. It tells you this must be something rare, this must be different, this must be something meant to happen. But psychology reveals something much deeper about age gap attraction. It is not always simply about love. Sometimes it is connected to projection, curiosity, emotional needs, and parts of ourselves that are looking for something we have not fully discovered. And this is where many people lose their ability to see clearly. They mistake strong emotions for true compatibility. They confuse someone's attention with genuine commitment. If you have ever felt strongly drawn towards someone who is significantly older or younger than you, you are not the only person who has experienced this. But there is a deeper reality inside this type of connection that many people never talk about. Sometimes what feels like a powerful bond can actually be an emotional mismatch hidden behind excitement and attraction. When an older person becomes emotionally connected to someone younger, or when a younger person becomes attached to someone older, there is often a psychological exchange happening beneath the surface. One person may be searching for energy, freshness, excitement, or a feeling of being admired again. The other person may be looking for stability, wisdom, reassurance, protection, or emotional guidance. This difference can create an incredibly powerful emotional experience that feels like love. But sometimes, it is chemistry created by contrast rather than true emotional alignment. You may find yourself thinking about them constantly. You replay conversations in your mind. You analyze every message, every reaction, and every small gesture, searching for hidden meaning. But your brain does not always show you reality exactly as it is. Sometimes it is simply trying to understand emotional stimulation, uncertainty, and the excitement created by something unfamiliar. And when an age difference exists, there can also be hidden power dynamics operating beneath the surface, influencing feelings and decisions without you even realizing it. So before you label it destiny, or immediately decide that it is wrong, you need to understand what your emotions are truly reacting to. You need to understand something that most people are never taught about emotional attraction across different ages. When someone older develops feelings for someone younger, or when the opposite happens, your brain is not only responding to the person themselves. It is also responding to what that person represents in your mind. Psychologists describe this as projection, and it is one of the strongest psychological forces that can shape human relationships. When you are younger, you may project qualities like security, experience, wisdom, or confidence onto someone older. You may feel uncertain about your own path, and this person appears calm, mature, and emotionally secure. They may seem like someone who already understands life, someone who has answers you are still searching for. But what you are seeing is not always the complete reality of who they are. Sometimes you are seeing your own desire for direction and stability reflected through another person. And when you are older, projection can take a different form. You may begin to associate a younger person with energy, possibility, admiration, excitement, or the feeling of becoming emotionally alive again. You may feel seen in a way you have not experienced for years. You may feel appreciated, valued, or needed in a way that reminds you of a part of yourself that you thought had disappeared. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Projection can feel like undeniable chemistry because it creates intense emotions without always creating emotional stability. The mind naturally fills missing information with imagination. And when imagination becomes connected to strong emotions, it can become extremely difficult to separate fantasy from reality. You start waiting for messages. You begin thinking about their silence. You attach meaning to small actions that may never have carried the importance you gave them. This is where attachment begins to develop. Not always from truly knowing someone, but from the anticipation, uncertainty, and emotional expectation surrounding them. The more unpredictable the connection becomes, the stronger the emotional pull can feel. And this is one reason age-gap relationships can become so consuming. They often activate curiosity and insecurity at the same time. Your nervous system becomes highly alert. Every conversation feels more significant. Every interaction feels amplified. Your brain begins creating powerful emotional responses because the experience feels unusual and different from what you normally know. But what you may actually be chasing is not only the person. You may be chasing the feeling of being chosen by someone who feels unique, unexpected, and different from your usual experiences. And that difference can easily be mistaken for emotional depth. But unfamiliar does not always mean meaningful. Unusual does not always mean healthy. When you finally slow down and observe your emotions without allowing fantasy to control your perspective, you begin to recognize whether this connection is built on genuine understanding, emotional maturity, shared values, and a realistic future. Or whether it is simply built on emotional contrast that feels powerful but may struggle to survive everyday life. True awareness gives you something important: clarity instead of confusion, self-respect instead of emotional dependency, and understanding instead of uncertainty. There is a moment in many age-gap connections when emotions stop feeling like something you're experiencing and begin feeling like something controlling you. And this transition is subtle but extremely important, because this is often where emotional imbalance begins shaping the way you see the relationship without you noticing. When someone significantly older or younger becomes part of your emotional world, they do not only bring their personality into the connection, they also bring their life experiences, expectations, beliefs, and unconscious emotional patterns. And your mind begins adjusting itself around their presence in ways that can feel like fascination, but are sometimes simply psychological adaptation. Human beings naturally adjust themselves around what they perceive as authority, experience, uniqueness, or novelty. So if the other person appears more experienced, your mind may unconsciously give their opinions more importance. If they appear younger, more energetic, or emotionally open, you may naturally become more protective, more invested, or more emotionally attached. And neither of these reactions are completely neutral. They influence how you understand their words, their silence, their attention, and even their affection. One of the most overlooked psychological factors in age-gap attraction is the perception of power. Not always actual power, but the emotional or social power we believe someone has. You may start feeling like this person understands something you do not. You may see them as emotionally ahead of you, or perhaps emotionally behind you, and that difference can create an imbalance that feels like attraction. Why? Because it activates a psychological need inside you, a need to catch up, a need to be guided, a need to protect, or a need to feel important. And this is where emotional responsibility can become unclear. Instead of two people simply meeting each other as equals, they can unconsciously begin stepping into roles. One becomes the teacher. One becomes the student, one becomes the rescuer, one becomes the person who needs saving, one becomes the person who leads, and the other becomes the person who follows. The difficult part is that these roles often develop without either person intentionally choosing them. But once these roles are established, emotions can become even stronger because roles create a sense of structure. And the human mind often mistakes structure for meaning. But structure does not always represent truth. Another important psychological element in these relationships is attachment activation. If you have an anxious attachment style, you may notice yourself becoming more focused on the person. You may think about them more often, become more emotionally sensitive to changes in their attention, and constantly search for signs that the connection is secure. You may analyze their words, their responses, and their behavior because your mind is trying to predict whether you are safe emotionally. On the other hand, if you have more avoidant tendencies, you may experience a push and pull pattern. You may desire closeness but feel overwhelmed when the connection becomes too intense. You may want emotional intimacy but also feel the need to create distance. And an age difference can amplify these patterns because it naturally creates questions about the future, compatibility, expectations, and emotional position. Uncertainty becomes a powerful force, and uncertainty is one of the strongest fuels for attachment, even when the attachment itself is not healthy. So what feels like a deep emotional bond may sometimes be your nervous system attempting to create stability inside a situation it does not fully understand. The real challenge is not necessarily the age difference itself. The deeper issue is the unexamined expectations, emotional roles, and hidden assumptions that develop within the connection. These factors quietly influence how you love, how you respond, how you interpret situations, and eventually how much emotional freedom you maintain. At some point in many intense connections, there is a turning point, a moment when the emotional intensity becomes so familiar that you stop questioning it. And this is exactly when it can have the strongest influence over your decisions. Because familiarity does not always equal safety. Just because something feels constant does not mean it is stable. In age gap attraction, the emotional pattern can sometimes become unpredictable. And when the brain experiences unpredictability, it often becomes more focused, not less. You begin adapting to emotional highs and lows and may start calling that experience passion. But unpredictability is one of the strongest reasons people become emotionally attached. The human brain naturally pays more attention to things it cannot fully predict. So when someone gives you affection intensely at one moment and then becomes distant later, your nervous system begins placing more importance on that person. Not because they are automatically your perfect match, but because your brain is trying to understand the changing emotional pattern. You begin creating explanations for their inconsistency. You may tell yourself they are complicated. You may believe they are misunderstood. You may convince yourself that their behavior proves they are unique or emotionally deeper than others. But psychology shows that inconsistency can sometimes create stronger attachment than steady, reliable behavior. And this is where emotional confusion can begin feeling like emotional depth. You are no longer only responding to the person, you are responding to the emotional pattern they create inside your mind and nervous system. And that pattern can become addictive because it keeps your attention active even when they are not physically present. Another important factor in age gap relationships is the feeling of emotional acceleration. Sometimes these connections seem to move faster than normal. Conversations become deeper quickly, personal stories are shared earlier, emotional vulnerability appears sooner. A strong sense of intimacy develops rapidly. But speed does not always mean depth. Sometimes speed simply means two people are creating meaning faster than they are actually building understanding. Real emotional connection is not measured only by how intense something feels. It is measured by consistency, honesty, emotional responsibility, and the ability of two people to support each other realistically. But when an age difference exists, those foundations can sometimes be overlooked because both people feel that something extraordinary is happening. They may rush to define the relationship before truly understanding it, and what feels like a powerful connection may actually be accelerated emotional bonding without a strong foundation. Over time, the lack of stability begins showing itself through confusion, overthinking, insecurity, and emotional dependency. You may find yourself trying to hold together something that was never fully balanced from the beginning. And this is why awareness becomes so important, because once you recognize the pattern clearly, you gain the ability to separate emotional intensity from emotional truth.